And therefore, that's a journey which we're all taking. And on that type of journey, we should be open-minded. We should have the bravery to make mistakes, because mistakes are very healthy. Mistakes are good. What happens if we have to re-examine all that we've been told about the mind, consciousness, and those divisions that exist? Particularly the one we looked at earlier, that is it true that the ego's defenses exist because it's threatened truly by the id, the ego, the unconscious, given that the unconscious is, after all, part of yourself? What happens if they're wrong there? What happens if, no, that unconscious energy rather wants to embrace, right, the ego, not destroy it? Wow, that's really important. According to the poets, that's what they believe. William Blake, for instance, who referred to the unconscious more as imagination, the imagination is one of the terms he used for it, basically believes that there is nothing negative about the unconscious at all, and that it's only the ego's perceptions of it, right? Remember R.D. Laing, psychophobia, fear of our own minds? The champions of selfhood, Rilke, Nietzsche, Alan Watts, Heidegger, Freud, Rand, whoever, they're asking us to drop that. They're asking us to walk alone, meaning focus on the internal adversary. Now, Theodore Roszak says, the id is that very proto-human psychic core that our evolution has spent millions of years molding to fit the planetary environment. Its seeming unruliness deserves a deeper understanding, if only because it grows from a long evolutionary history. In the course of that history, its dominant characteristics must have been selected for some good reason. In other words, he's saying that part of us, that so-called id that we've repressed and are not directly connected to, is very ancient, very deep. And it's connected to nature. It might even be the same thing. The id, he says, conserves from its long maturing process our treasury of ecological intelligence. Its intractability stems from its deeply ingrained resistance to all social forms that endanger the harmony of the human and the natural. Its untamed selfishness represents a bond between psyche and cosmos whose distant origins reach back to the initial conditions of the Big Bang. In other words, in the unconscious, in Blake's imagination, is the bond between us and nature. In that room, in that place, is the place of the wedding. It has already taken place. But we've slammed the door on that. He says, just as there is a wisdom of the body which often has a better sense of health than medical science, so too there may be a wisdom of the id that knows what sanity is better than any school of psychiatry whose standard of normality is essentially a defense against misconceived social necessity. You know, you don't fit into the system, right, you're broken. And we'll move in to do the fixing. There's a tie-in with time involved in this. Alan Watts talks about it. He says, your entire education has deprived you of this capacity because it was preparing you for the future instead of showing you how to be alive now. In other words, you have been hypnotized by an educational processing system arranged in grades or steps, supposedly leading to some ultimate success. And of course, like we said, we're going to deal with solutions. So then, okay, look, how do we fix this problem? How do we enter back into a personal relationship with that imagination? Wow, it's so complex. Thousands of dollars are paid to psychologists, gurus, and every other kind of person to try and tell us how to do it. Whole movements have arisen. It's very simple. You speak to it. Your relationship with it is no different than your relationship how you cultivate a relationship with a person, the neighbor. As Crowley says, in the knowledge and conversation of his holy guardian angel, the adept is possessed of all he can possibly need. To consult any other is to insult one's angel. Why are you turning to the world? Why are you seeking guidance from the misguided? Why do you seek others to become dependent on you? Why do you become dependent on them? Every time you do that, it's a slap in the face for your higher self. Remember they talked about that a sin unto God will be forgiven, a sin unto the Son of Man will be forgiven, but a sin unto the Holy Spirit can never be forgiven in this life or the next. If you followed my work, you'll know that I identify the self with the Holy Spirit. A sin of yourself. Well then, how can it be forgiven by any external agency? The whole remedy of life is to enter into dialogue with yourself. a conversation. You speak to yourself in the street today, what will happen to you? Don't you know that Beethoven had that dialogue with himself? So did Rilke, so did Rodin, so did Mozart, so did Dali, so did Magritte. Anyone you know as a genius has that perpetual inner dialogue. You wake up, you speak to yourself, you are aware of yourself, and you have that inner dialogue. They're trying to train and drug you out of that today. But this goes very, 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 very deeply indeed. But all I would say is enter into dialogue with it as naturally and as easily as you do with other people. It's no more complex than that. And it's a great honor to yourself to do so. Music is an aspect of this. Leonard Shlain talks about the arts. The ability of species to generate and respond to music is one of the great unexplained mysteries of nature. Apparently, appreciation of music is built into the genetic foundation of all higher life forms. In humans, perfect pitch seems to be encoded somewhere within the strands of DNA. If the fittest do need to survive, then how does the ability to sing in key or keep time to rhythm complement or enhance that survival? The answer is simply, you're not here only to survive. That's why you have that encoding. That's why you have that understanding. Because how does the unconscious speak to you? We talked about you entering into dialogue with it in a very natural way. It speaks to you through art and music. Heidegger also mentioned this. The very sound of the unconscious is music. Musical notation, language, even the sound of language, the sound of words is a form of music. Or art. So again, these are ways that people can get involved in it. Pertaining to all of this, of course, is the question of death. What does all we're talking about have for the final termination of life, or for the other forms of death and mortality that we meet every day of the world? And also don't forget the highest anxiety, the highest fear, right, which all forms of tyranny use on you to freeze your brain, and which we also the internal adversary. And the Heideggers and the Schopenhauers and the Kierkegaards tried to turn it around for you and say, well, okay, since you have the fear of death, at least look at it positively to say maybe that'll spur you to feeling lucid about your life. They call it being unto death. By having a consciousness of mortality, right, and temporality, maybe that will do the trick to awaken man to his authentic sense of self. But without even getting into that, we do have this concept of death and questions about it and fear and so on related to this question. And that fear can be manipulated by those who wish to do so. But here's what Schopenhauer said about it, and it's very, very pertinent. He says, consciousness is destroyed in death, to be sure, but that which has been producing it by no means is destroyed. I give the analogy of a match. You strike a match and a flame comes on it, right? And the stick is your life. That match is material, and the light is energy. Slowly the match burns down. The light burns the match away, burns the matter away. And the flame is exhausted, right? Or as the wax or as the match is exhausted, the flame disappears, going back from whence it came. What do? You take another match and strike it. There's the flame again. You take another one, another one, another one. And the light, exactly the same light, comes on every match. In other words, you could fill this entire planet with burned out matches, and you could theoretically fill the entire universe with nothing but burned out struck matches, right? All dead, all expired, and yet you haven't reduced that flame one bit. Same thing with mortality, same thing with the body. You may die, you may pass on your material aspect of yourself and all those ideas, but the energy that brought you and all life into existence, purely with this negentropic power we've been looking at, that's going nowhere. Time to align your mind with that. It's only orientation. You can identify with the matter that is burned up, the broken, burned out match, or the flame that is never reduced even one bit by those exhausted material vessels. But we don't want anything to do with that. We're sick of our humanity. We're sick of our soul. We're sick of our emotions. We're sick of all that dark side stuff and all that sorrow. See, what's the other way? What's all this post-humanism about? You're so sick of yourself, you're so tired of your own thought processes, you're tired of your emotions, that now they're going to lead you right up to this global dystopia by saying, we'll deal with it. You won't even have them anymore, that's the answer. Don't worry about your individual destiny or dharma or any of that. We're heading towards a cybernetic world, a post-human world. constantly pulled outward, which is what science and technology is doing. Come over here, your life is only utilitarian, make the best of it, function in the society, be a good person in the social hive, conform just like the prisoner. Number 6, it's good because the mass says it's good. And don't worry, give us enough time, we'll even prolong life. What kind of life? Oh, I want them to really prolong the prison sentence in the Bastille of lies that they've created for us. Can't wait. Artificiality is another word for it. Jerry Mander says, it has been only 2 generations since artificial light became so widespread that we moved into artificially lighted environments. Now, most of the light we ingest through our skin and eyes is artificial. We are starved for some natural light spectra, and we have overdosed on those spectra that come from artificial light, incandescent, fluorescent, mercury, vapor, sodium, television, and others. Indeed, about 90% of the total emission of an incandescent lamp lies in the infrared. But as we said, scientists are now working overtime to make sure that we don't ever have to look at any of these darker emotions, which, as we said, are the stages along the road of selfhood, right? Yeah. Now we can turn off the brain's morality centers. We can make psychopaths of you all like we are psychopathic. As Aldous Huxley said, never before have we been in a position to make so many fools, maniacs, and criminals. But this is also very much a collective movement. And if we look to the scientists, do we find any answers? Eric Fromm says the reasons why social scientists have not considered the question of the optimal social conditions for man's growth a matter of primary concern can easily be discerned if one recognizes the sad fact that, with a few outstanding exceptions, social scientists are essentially apologists for and not critics of the existing social system. Mathematicians try to negate the validity of supernatural experiences and phenomena, I write. They say that many apparently supernatural experiences are simply coincidences mistaken for something unique. They cite experiences had by many people and say they're illegitimate. Remember, idiothetic, nomothetic, idiographic. You have it, it's your experience, but you can't reproduce it. Oh, well, it didn't happen, it's inauthentic. However, no scientist can altogether, this is the argument you can use against them, however, no scientist can altogether eliminate the possibility of a truly numinous experience from occurring. Just because something is unlikely or scientifically unverifiable does not mean that it did not occur. Moreover, scientists merely interpret interpretations. That is, they do not measure or quantify the actual experience. They nomothetically measure and quantify the consequences, afterthoughts, and opinions of the experiencer. They compare and contrast an experience with others of a similar kind. However, all experiences of a numinous nature, right, are subjectively interpreted, meaning all those deep inner idiographic experiences are subjectively interpreted. So no true or wholly relevant objective statement can be made on them, right? There is only subjective truth. Everything else is interpretation. The believer in supernatural phenomena can't altogether convince a scientist of the validity of the experience they've had. They can only relate what it meant to them personally. Party B was not present during the experience and can't know what it was like. Now, one has an idea of their own being or selfhood. One person's idea is not identical as another's about even that idea of self. If it were, you wouldn't have a self. The very word implies separation, differentiation. The self is distinct, unique, and utterly private. Any attempt to violate the self's autonomy via communication or relationship weakens the self and the experiences had by the self. Sharing has no validity to the self. There is no relationship between the self and the world of other people. Thomas Godwin, the father of Mary Shelley, said that in one sense, everything that goes by the name of cooperation is in a sense evil. And I think he was talking about this. Never forget when you read passages like this, though, that what I'm really talking about is trying to discover all those forces that prevent you from coming to the self, both scientific and theological and social. The opposite, of course, of what we're talking about here is the consensus that is now becoming ubiquitous, which is what people want. They want to turn off all of that stuff in their heads. We send our children there, we indoctrinate them into saying, what makes you the same as everybody else? And it's not wrong to do that, but to the extent where the selfhood is erased and the ubiquitous collectivity, basically nothing is you know what that's right? The global village is rising on the death of a man's individuality, his own sense of self. Is that a good thing? You know what's going to happen? The more that this takes place, the very individual will become totally expendable. A very important point, which I guess we can't have time to go into, is the whole idea of the subject-objective thing, where the psychologist Jung has even discovered that, look, your unconscious content, this is an aspect of yourself, is regarded as separate and objective. In psychological terms, it's one of the arguments psychologists use against scientists, by the way, but they say that internally, a man's own inner thought processes, his content of his own unconscious, is considered as external as a table or chair or tree or anything outside. What a predicament. We want to come up to look at a bit of something to do with relationships, so how this dynamic works more in our private lives, you see. But first we have a few points from Fromm on false love. As I've said in other works, it's not in fact anger, violence, hatred that has caused any of the world's problems. Not really. It's false love. People need to really give that some major thought. It's that which is posing as the real authentic thing that causes the problems. And Fromm talks about this. He says, the more love I turn toward the outside world and less love I have for myself, and vice versa. Freud is thus moved to describe the phenomena of falling in love as an impoverishment of one's self-love, because all love is turned to an object outside oneself. Right? And Fromm says, there is no word in our language which has been so much misused and prostituted as the word love. It has been preached by those who were ready to condone every cruelty, if it served their purposes. It has been used as a disguise under which to force people into sacrificing their own happiness, into submitting their whole self to those who profited from this surrender. You know, what's done under the name of love is so corrupt. Fromm says the majority of well-adapted individuals have lost their own self at an early age and replaced it completely by a social self offered to them by society. They have no neurotic conflicts because they themselves, and therefore the discrepancy between themselves and the outside world, have disappeared. The immersion in the pseudo-self. Now, two phenomena closely connected with each other are frequently presented as love, the masochistic and sadistic love. In the case of masochistic love, one gives up oneself, one's initiative and integrity in order to become submerged entirely in the other person who is felt to be stronger. Because of deep anxieties which give rise to the feelings that one cannot stand on one's own feet, one wants to be rid of one's own individual self and to become part of another human being, thus becoming secure and finding a center which one misses in oneself. And there are many people who are experts in making us dependent, who want us to feel guilty. Now, the surrender of one's own self has often been praised as an example of the greatest love. It is actually a form of idolatry, and also an annihilation of the self. The sadistic love, on the other hand, springs from the desire to swallow its subject, to make him a will-less instrument in one's own hands. This drive is also rooted in a deep anxiety and an ability to stand alone. But instead of finding increased strength by being swallowed, strength and security are found in having a limited power over the other person. The masochistic as well as sadistic kind of love are expression of one basic need, which springs from a basic inability to be independent. Now, many married couples stay together for this reason. The marriage gives them the opportunity to experience hate, quarrels, sadism, and sublimation. They stay together not in spite of their fights, but because of them. Masochistic behavior and pleasure in suffering or submitting has one of its roots in this need for excitement. Masochistic persons suffer from the difficulty of being able to initiate excitation and of reacting readily to normal stimuli. But they can react when the stimulus overpowers them, as it were, when they can give up themselves to the excitement forced upon them. See. Oh, religion. Slaves, submit yourself to your masters with all respect, not only to those who are good and considerate, but also to those who are harsh. For it is commendable if a man bears up under pain of unjust suffering because he is conscious of God. But if you suffer for doing good and you endure it, this is commendable before God. Look at this. The Egyptians, Babylonians, Greeks, and Romans had no word in their language for sin. The Israelites introduced both the word and the concept into the stream of Western civilization, and by so doing diverted it. I've had this quote so many times. We look at it one more time in this context. So we have a clear definition of psychopathy and tyranny. Nothing, says Martin Luther, is more poisonous, harmful, or devilish than a man in rebellion. Yeah, to them. The ones who are bending over backwards to rape you of every kind of selfhood that you could imagine. Or immerse you in the collective, make it so seductive with their talismanic words. It's not that sports and enjoyments are wrong, it's just what is it predicated upon. Or again, since they know that a lot of people, right, want to break away from that, they're not happy with that, you create the gimmick merchants who will take you a little bit further, you see, who will promise you all sorts of escapes from that mediocrity. But we have to question whether or not that's really ultimately authentic. Are they really helping us to find ourselves, or are they just creating a new set of allegiances? Or there's a total dropout, just like, I can't handle this anymore, and flop. The person just gives in to the mass, the Dionysian mass. As we've been studying, there's a whole net of deceivers waiting there to entrap. As Krishnamurti said, it is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. And we'll finish off by reciting his amazing words that really help to encapsulate what we've been talking about here today. He said that truth is a pathless land, and you cannot approach it by any path whatsoever, by any religion, by any sect. Truth, being limitless, unconditioned, unapproachable by any path whatsoever, cannot be organized. Nor should any organization be formed to lead or to coerce people along any particular path. My only concern is to set humanity absolutely, unconditionally free. Man cannot come to it through any organization, through any creed, through any dogma, priest or ritual, not through any philosophical knowledge or psychological technique. He has to find it through the understanding of the contents of his own mind, through observation, and not through intellectual analyses or introspective dissection. And then Jung reminds us of the conflict and the difficulty. The shadow, he says, is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality. For no one can become conscious of the shadow without considerable moral effort. See, the shadow stands between you and yourself. It stands in the way of the soul. But shadow implies a shadow. Shadow, he means shadow literally. What is a shadow? To have a shadow, you must have something that's casting it. The shadow is not the shadow of your ego, because as we said, the ego is a social ego. So the shadow is really the shadow cast by your social persona, that collective mishmash hive that you've embodied. It's actually one of the least personal things about you, is what the shadow is. The shadow is everybody's shadow. And if you do not bring all the knights and the elements and the archetypes and the agencies together, shamanic teaching spoke about the round table, the coming together, no head, no masculine authority, no hierarchy. All the original shamanic models were based on the sphere, the hologram, the circle. But until you have brought all the voices, all the knights from all their travels to the table, how are you going to resolve the problems and the questions? They all have to be facing the same direction. All the aspects of yourself, nothing banished, nothing repressed. Because you will not fight tyranny with force, only with wisdom, and most importantly, psychic immunity. Erich Fromm talks about the outsider by saying, in fact, it is the fully sane person who feels isolated in the insane society. And he may suffer so much for the incapacity to communicate that it is he who becomes psychotic. As we've said, the person who's trying to handle this becomes the outsider. And if he's not immune, he will be destroyed. The net that catches everybody right now, because this is happening all across the world, this is where the big leviathans come in. To try and hope that you won't do it, that you'll take the easy way out. Take a pill, it's simple, right? But you've just shot your soul to death. Why do all that inner work? And I'll say what I said at the beginning. What you have to understand is that when these dark aspects start to come and visit, we don't welcome them in. We imagine that we're suddenly being haunted and destroyed. The depressions that people feel, the anxieties, is actually, when you really see it correctly, is the first time they've even negotiated that inner voice, but they've learned to think of that as the enemy, as opposed to the voices of the world. Here we now have it. Scientists may soon be able to erase fear and trauma from your mind. That is the death of humanity. That is 2012. That is post-humanism. That's where we're going. All the other aspects of it are kind of less important than this. As David Hawkins reminds us, there is no antidepressant that will cure a depression that's spiritually based. For the malaise does not originate from brain dysfunction, but from an accurate response to the desecration of life. Now here's the final point. Jung brought up this most incredible point about the dynamics of the unconscious mind, and basically it goes for all kinds of mysteries. He says, we know that the mask of the unconscious is not rigid. It reflects the face we turn toward it. Hostility lends it a threatening aspect. Friendliness softens its features. It only becomes dangerous when our conscious attitude to it is hopelessly wrong. To the degree that we repress it, its danger increases. In other words, to the unconscious, like to any mystery, even to people, whatever attitude, because attitude is so important, that you project into it is what it becomes. So if you turn a face of hostility and false curiosity and power hungriness or fear or anxiety towards the unconscious, you'll be met with demons. In the unconscious, there is no road except your steps as you make it. Like Krishnamurti is saying, it's a pathless land. You enter into it at your own will with no companions. And you meet there whatever is in your psyche. Whatever you bring to it is what it reflects. And this is partly the reason why a lot of people won't do this, because there's very toxic people who can never do this. And then it's also the reason which stops us from going forward. Our ideas shape our reality. Then if we know that, we have to be very, very cautious about what we're doing. Blake said it this way, in your own bosom you bear your heaven and earth, and all you behold. Though it appears without, it is within, in your imagination, of which this world of mortality is but a shadow. Remember the Maya, the ideas that we have about that? And Rand says that men have been taught that it is a virtue to agree with others, but the Creator is the man who disagrees. Men have been taught that it is a virtue to swim with the current, but the Creator is the man who goes against the current. Men have been taught that it is a virtue to stand together, but the Creator is the man who stands alone. Shwala Delubich strikes at the heart of all these scientific paradigms. He says man is not a beast, he is animated. Man is the epitome of the cosmos, a creature housing the divine spark. Man is not an evolved amphibian or animal form that has become what we are. Man is perfect at his origin, a divine being who has degenerated into what we are. Look at that. Man is not an evolved amphibian, an animal form that became what we are. Right? Hasn't we been taught that from the childhood? Man is perfect at his origin, a divine being who has degenerated into what we are. He's talking about devolution. The scientists are always trying to put earrings on the Mona Lisa, fix what isn't broken. What is the attitude that we show to the unconscious? Heidegger already told you what it is. That your thinking, true consciousness, is actually an act of thanks. It's actually an act of daily gratitude, not in some forced New Age spinner rack way. A complete understanding of the miracle of your existence here and now, and that thing out there that you see every morning, the sunrise, the clouds, the stars, that whole natural matrix out there is you, by the way. It's not separate from you. That's a delusion. That's your Maya. That is you. Treat it as such. If you treat it toxically, that's because you have a toxic attitude towards yourself. If you treat it with reverence, it's because you have a reverent attitude towards yourself. But it's all rooted in your own vision and understanding of yourself. And we'll finish on this. The beautiful words of Chung Tzu from the 4th century BC, who literally teaches us, lets us know what leads towards the true liberation and wisdom. He says, he who can free himself from achievement and from fame, descend and be lost amid the masses of men, he will flow like the Tao. Unseen he will go about like life itself, with no name and no home. Simple he is, without distinction. To all appearances, he is a fool. His steps leave no trace. He has no power. He achieves nothing, has no reputation. Since he judges no one judges him. Such is the perfect man. His boat is empty. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time these last 3 months. It's been a great pleasure. I've enjoyed it, and Stay in touch with us, by email and other things, and the postings of the talk online. Share it with your friends. Contact me for resources. And let's just go out and enjoy the rest of the day. Thanks a lot. The whole thing is about who am I, why am I here, and where am I going? And that's it. That's what this is all about. That's what this is all about. It's all about selfhood.